Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Underneath Podcast. Welcome to the Underneath Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Heart of Darkness class. This is your host, Cale Zimmerman. Let me. All right, got that going. You did that over there, and we are back. So, welcome to session number 2 for our Defense Against the Dark Arts mini course on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Just as a point of order here, if I know that I've been sending everybody to the Substack to sign up for free. If you could do that, that'd be great. But while you're here on YouTube, it would be wonderful if you hit the like button and the subscribe button and all that nice stuff that I'm supposed to say as a good YouTuber. But as of yet, I am not a good YouTuber, so I'm doing my best to remedy the situation. But at any rate, like I said, we are back to the Heart of Darkness session 2, which is the second part of chapter 1. If you are paying attention to your copy at home, you can see that this novella, the short novel, is broken up into 3 parts, basically 30, 30, 30. It's about 95 pages thereabouts. So we are going to finish up the first part today with anticipation that it'll finally get on the steamer for the second part. And then in the third part, we get finally the meeting that we're going to be waiting for. We're intensely waiting for, which of course is for Mr. Kurtz, Captain Kurtz. And very exciting to get there. So as is typical, I want to, I made a couple of slides just to kind of keep us going here. I am going to do my best to keep my focus on the stream and just sort of teaching the course. I will look in the comment section at a certain point if you have questions, but we'll get into sort of the protocol with that. Once you get there, you can put question, and then I'll try to answer a question and do it that way. Also, if you are interested in coming onto the screen, that might be great too. Just give me a little bit of a sense of an audience. As I'm sure many of you know, I am a classroom teacher. I am the prep school teacher that you either forgot about or you wish you had, or at least that's what I hope. And so what I learned in the whole COVID fiasco is just how real and how really important physical presence is. But that's okay. We're going to use the YouTubes here for what it's best for, which is a kind of liminal thing. My goal here is to put you to old books, the wisdom that you can get not only in the old books, but that the process itself of reading old books is a kind of cheat code of sorts. It's a little bit of a way of Well, as I say here in the slide, a kind of defense against the dark arts. And my contention is that we should have a defense against such things. You can see there on the picture, right there. There's defense against the dark arts. But also there's an old picture I found of a sailor telling his fellow sailors a story, or as we've been talking about it from last class, the notion of a yarn. A yarn is a sort of a perfect sailor speak for the kind of stories that a sailor tells. And I just want to remind you that our character Marlowe is a character on the board the ship Nellie. It's a cruising yawl. It's just a small little boat, kind of almost like a pleasure boat, that kind of thing. But Marlowe is telling a story on top of the ship, and his stories are different from other sailors' stories. And so I want to just remind you, if you go back to, page, and here I am, go back to page 6, just to remind you that Marlowe's yarns, these woven things, these woven stories, are different. He says, this is our narrator, not Marlowe yet. He's talking about Marlowe, and he says, the yarns of seamen have an effective simplicity, the whole meaning of which lies within the shell of a cracked nut. But as has been said, Marlowe is not typical if his propensity to spin yarns be accepted. And to him, the meaning of an episode was not inside like a kernel, but outside, enveloping the tale, which brought it out only as a glow brings out a haze, in the likeness of one of these misty halos that sometimes are made visible by the spectral illumination of the moonshine. And so what Marlowe really, his stories are not so much about delivering a kind of nugget, delivering a kind of moral that you can take away, although that's part of it too. But more importantly, it's about creating an effect. And I want you to lean into this, that part of this process of reading an old book is not just so that we can kind of pick out all the good stuff and we can kind of have this now as a kind of superpower, the way you pick up coins in a Super Mario Brothers game, say, but rather it's the experience itself, that the experience itself is a kind of informing experience unto itself. And so Marlowe's stories are different, and we are set for exactly this kind of different story. So there I'm just sort of using Marlowe sitting amongst the boys telling us his story. And so we are sort of brought into this strange thing, this different kind of story. And so therefore we're going to have to talk a little bit about, what is a story and what does it do and how does it work? And so just to sort of restart us here, and I'll make myself smaller so you can see this stuff is bigger. What are we even doing here in this Defense Against the Dark Arts course, right? Well, part of what we're doing here is we are, I want to get you to the point where you feel better about reading, like that you can do this, what we're about to do. But it takes a little bit of practice and it takes a little bit of guidance, and I'm happy to be part of that process. I want you to feel more confident by showing you the ropes. Now, of course, it's funny, I sort of just dashed that out couple of hours ago as I was preparing my comments today, but then I realized that even that phrase, to show one the ropes, is sailor speak, right? It's a sailor metaphor. And as you might know, if you've had spent any time on a ship or a boat, a sailboat in particular, there's this very complex rigging and system of ropes and pulleys. And so for a newbie, you might feel a little bit unconfident. Do I pull on this one? Do I pull on it? Do I do this kind of knot? Do I do another kind of knot? And so to be shown the ropes is to become comfortable in the milieu, right? And so what I want for you in particular is to be comfortable doing the kinds of things that we're doing. Now, one of the reasons why I picked The Heart of Darkness, and I mentioned this last class, one of the reasons why I picked this novel in particular, number one, it's manageable. It's not even 100 pages. So anybody can do that, right? All of us have the sort of the latent powers to read 100 pages over the span of 5 different periods of time. Okay. But secondly, I contend that this masterpiece is a story that is also about story, right? So it does this kind of meta level. And you will find as you sort of dig deeper into these great works that almost always stories contain within themselves a gloss of a sort about what it means to be in a story. You can hear this in Shakespeare. You can see this in all of sort of the great works, Dante, the same kind of thing, where the story is itself, like what we see depicted, say, on the screen, so to speak, but also it is an instruction in how stories work and how we are to be formed by the story, right? And so, and then which again, you can see leads me into that last bullet point on the bottom of this slide there. I want you to see story by studying a story to give you an insight into story, right? And so this is your sort of first move into recognizing the kind of superpower that you can gain by reading these kinds of stories, right? It is not merely about amassing, a row of books in my background, which you could say, oh yeah, I read that and I read that and read that. That's all fine and good, right? These are trophies on some level. I get that. But even more than that, right? That the stories give you an insight into sort of the way things work. And it's important, of course, to point out that story and life are not the same thing. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit here. Okay. So what we are always asking, right, is what do we see and what do we hear, right? That is what you have to ask yourself. And if you find yourself kind of floating in and out of consciousness as you are reading your book, you might ask yourself, okay, I just finished a page, I think, right? You're thinking about work, you're thinking about something else, or you're, God forbid, you're going to take out one of these, right? And start looking at your Twitter feed. Don't do that, right? Pay attention to the thing in front of you right now. And then you are asking yourself doggedly, and I mean doggedly, what do we see? What do we hear? You're always asking yourself that question. And so with particularly difficult works, I'll often sit right on the bottom of my page what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, right? And I think that can really give you a kind of hold on it. It helps you pay attention, right? And as we've talked about, there is a war for your attention. And I think that reading something like Heart of Darkness, it seems so precious. It seems so sort of, oh, isn't that nice? You can go and read a nice old book with Kale. Like, isn't that great? No, my contention, right, is that this is exactly the kind of things that are a kind of defense against the mind control, that we see flooding our Twitter feeds and our Facebook feeds and flooding cable news and all of these kinds of things, right? And I don't have to, I don't want to make this political, of course, but we are in the middle of it seems like we're always in the middle of a presidential season, but we really are in one right now. And all this stuff, of course, is flying at us backwards and forwards. And so how do you make sense out of all these things? And so I think you need to learn how to pay attention and see the right things and see the patterns that are underneath everything, right? So that's what I want you to do. And so my question to you is, why are we being told a story by a character that is in the story? Why does Conrad bother with this frame device? It's a question we can think about, and you can maybe prompt me later on at the end of the session. We can talk a little bit about that. We have an unnamed narrator that is witnessing Marlowe tell the story, and he is kind of telling us Marlowe's story. So why do we have this one step removed? What's going on there? Right? In other words, what is that frame, and what is a frame for? Now, we talk a lot about this idea of a frame. And what a frame does is it shows you where to pay attention, right? If you think of a viewfinder, if you think of a scope, if you think of any of these kinds of things, if you think of a frame of a painting, well, the frame demarcates significance. You might even say that a frame shows you what is sacred. Right? That the frame, everything inside this space is important. Everything outside of this space is not important, at least for the time being, right? So if we can think about the frame as directing our focus and directing our attention, right? And so you have a story about a story, and you have a frame that is about a frame. And what does that frame then afford us? And so when we are prepped by the narrators and we are about to go into one of Marlowe's inconclusive experiences, we should recognize, right, that we are being shown how to see the significant thing, right? And so if any of you are familiar with the Vervaeke thing about relevance realization, that's what frames really do for us, right? And so we have to pay attention to the framing device, and we have to pay attention to the narrative that Marlowe is going to share with us. And I think, as you can see by the end of this reading, this is not just some random experience from Marlowe, but rather this is the kind of experience that is, you might even say, the most important kind of experience. Okay, so, all right, why is the story told in this out of order sequence? It's another thing that I want you to pay attention to. And for us, we watch lots of movies, we watch lots of high-end television, and we are very prepared for this sort of asequential storytelling, especially when images are involved. And so I want you to lean a little bit heavily on those things. I was thinking today about this sort of out of order images and these out of order storytelling. And I was thinking about the movie Gladiator today. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. And the very opening sequence, you see a hand, and it is floating above a field of ripe wheat, right? And his fingers are kind of floating through it. And the image has nothing to do with what is going on at the beginning of that story. Now, a savvy viewer and a reviewer, someone who watches the movie again, will recognize that that is an image for Maximus, the main character. That is an image for the Elysian Fields, right? The heaven that he is looking forward to, right? This place of fate. And so, but why would the storyteller, why would the director give us this image of the hand floating above the wheat right at the beginning? Well, what he's doing is he's priming us, he's preparing us for the telos of the story. He's preparing us to experience this thing at the very end, right? And so why is this story told out of order and in this sequence? And the last thing that I want to bring, because I think it bears with this is an idea that I got from a screenwriting coach and writer by the name of Robert McKee. And in his book, Story, right here, I have a copy of it right here. I'll show it to you. Story, it's probably backwards, but anyway, it's a fantastic book. But he talks about this idea of aesthetic emotion. Okay, aesthetic emotion. He says, in life, unlike in story, but in life, idea and emotion come to us separately. Right, idea, right? This whole realm of the rational, the ideas. Come separately from emotion. But in the work of art, right, they fuse these two things together, right? The notion of idea and emotion come together. That is why, when we see a beloved character die in a movie, let's say, it is a soaring moment of fusion of idea and emotion at the same time. But in life, those things hit us differently. Okay, so the reason why I'm spending any time with this is that scratch that. Marlowe is going to give us this experience in which he's going to fuse idea and emotion at the same time. This is what all of this journey will be about. We've talked about it as a pilgrimage earlier on, but all of this journey is going to be preparing us for this moment, right? Because in life, we might experience something horrific or something amazing, and it is only later in which we recognize the significance of this thing, right? But the reason why we are drawn to story, and the reason why we are drawn to art, is that in these moments, we can bring these two things together, which would have, and some people, even McKee calls it, somewhat ironically, because he's, a religious experience, right? And a story well told is, in fact, a kind of religious experience, especially when we find that it resonates deeply within us. Okay, so this idea of story then is uniquely religious. Okay, so let's get to the quiz. Now, like I said before, this is sort of a model that I use for my classroom, my in the flesh classroom. I'm not keeping keeping you through this. If you want to take the quiz at home and see if you can pass it, that's fine. Although if you notice, I put the page numbers there in advance. But before we get to the first question, I just want you to point out that we ended our last class with this line, and I think it's important. Right? Remember, he is going down the coast of Africa. He's left Europe. He's going down the coast of Africa. And if you look at a map of Africa, the Congo River is just after that outcropping. When the western coast goes in like this before it goes down, the Congo River is right there, and that is where he is headed. Okay, and he says, it was like this travel, right? It was like a weary pilgrimage amongst hints for nightmares. Okay, so this idea of a nightmare, this dreamscape, this sort of negatively valenced dreamscape becomes this part of the experience. And so remember, unlike other sailors' stories in which the point is just the point, like, don't walk where you're not supposed to, for Marlowe, the point of the story is the vibe, is the effect that it has upon us as we experience this thing. And so now he is sort of showing us that he himself has been sort of worn down with this weary, feverish, a disassociative like pilgrimage down the coast of Africa before he even gets into the continent itself. All right. And so, and meanwhile, all the bells are going off as he gets to. So he gets to this outer station, and it is an absolute disaster zone, right? It is just totally disgusting. There's these detonations going off, these weird. It's an image of Dante's hell, and you've got these enslaved Africans, and you've got some who are doing the enslaving, and the whole scene is completely upside down. And he says on page 19, this is right in the middle of the page, maybe 10 lines from the top. This is page 19. I've seen the devil of violence and the devil of greed and the devil of hot desire. But by all the stars, these were strong, lusty, red-eyed devils that swayed and drove men, I tell you. But as I stood on this hillside, I foresaw that in the blinding sunshine of that land, I would become acquainted with a flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of a rapacious and pitiless folly, right? And he says later on, it seemed to me I had stepped into the gloomy circle of some inferno. Notice, of course, the capital I on Inferno. That should be the signal to us that he is referencing Dante's Inferno, the first part of his Divine Comedy. And so the power of that association, remember I said last class that we are only as good as our metaphors, right? And so even having the idea of Dante's descent into hell and then his climb up purgatory and his ascent up into the heavenly realm in Paradiso, that is a kind of model that we're working on, but this one is going to be pure hell. And there he sees this flabby devil that he will come up. So notice that he's already invoking this language before we even experience the thing that he wants us to experience, okay? But the whole endeavor just seems to be completely upside down and backwards. These natives are just dying in the shade, left to their own devices. The whole thing, the work, as he calls it with a capital W, is not exactly the work that his poor aunt from the continent thought it was. In fact, this whole thing is pretty disgusting. And so we are treated here with our first portrait, the portrait of the chief accountant. And I want you to notice that throughout this piece, it is only Kurtz, Marlowe, and I think Fresleven that actually get a name. But most of the people are described by their function, right? So we've got the captain and the boiler maker, we've got the accountant and the brick maker, and we've got all these people that we're going to, the interior manager and the all of these, they're described as through their function. I think that is true to life. I think that when you're telling a story to friends, you save the names for the important characters, and otherwise everybody else is a kind of a function. And so I think it works here too. So let's go to this first portrait. And I want us to think about it like that, the way that an artist might paint a portrait. So this is, if you're following along on the Penguin Classic edition here, this is on page 21. He says, 4 lines from the top. When near the buildings, I met a white man in such an unexpected elegance of get-up that in the first moment I took him for a sort of vision. I saw a high starched collar, white cuffs, a light alpaca jacket, snowy trousers, a clear silk necktie, and varnished boots. No hat. Hair parted, brushed, oiled under a green-lined parasol, held in a big white hand. He was amazing and had a pen holder behind his ear. I shook hands with this miracle. I learned he was the company's chief accountant and that all the bookkeeping was done at this station. He had come out for a moment, he said, to get a breath of fresh air. The expression sounded wonderfully odd with its suggestion of sedentary desk life. I wouldn't have mentioned the fellow to you at all, only it was from his lips that I first heard the name of the man who is so indissolubly connected with the memories of that time. Moreover, I respected the fellow. Yes, I respected his collars, his vast cuffs, his brushed head. His appearance was certainly that of a hairdresser's dummy, but in the great demoralization of the land, he kept up his appearance. That's backbone. His starched collars and got-up shirt fronts were achievements of character. Now, I want to point out that he is dripping with sarcasm in this depiction. Of course, he is recognized as soon as he's gotten off the boat here at the outer station that this is like a crazy place, right? You have people dying in the bushes. You have people randomly being killed. Everything is in disarray. Everything is out of order. And yet this chief accountant, everything is sort of tip-top, clean. I's are dotted and T's are crossed, the whole bit, right? And this will come to be seen as maybe precious, right? As you notice in the next portion, he's kind of, this white guy gets pulled in. He's sick and he's dying, and he gets pulled into the office there, and the accountant is just like annoyed that he's there, right? And I think the sarcasm in which Marlowe is depicting this character of the chief accountant is pretty thick and pretty rich. In other words, in the general sea of chaos and disorder, the accountant really cares about his stiff, sharp collars and his everything is perfectly done. His nails are done. Everything is perfect, right? And so there's this unexpected elegance, right? And there's a disconnect between these two things. Like, how can you be where you are, and yet here you are with your respected collars, these achievements of character. And it is here, of course, that we find out that what the company is really doing here is not bringing the light of civilization, the fire of civilization, but they are extracting ivory from the continent, right? Ivory. Everybody speaks of ivory. Now, I want you to go to page 22, and they bring this sick guy in, and look at the way in which we first hear the name Kurtz, but look at the situation. Let's see. Okay, he says, when a truckle bed with a sick man, some invalided agent from up country, was hurriedly put in there, he exhibited a gentle annoyance. The groans of this sick person, he said, distract my attention. And without that, it is extremely difficult to guard against clerical errors in this climate. Now, he cares about making sure that his dual entry spreadsheet is clean. And yet, there he is in the midst of his work, and there's a dying man on the floor of his, and the dying man, what an annoyance, is distracting him from his spreadsheet, right? So you can kind of see this comfortable abstraction versus the sort of the dark inhumanity of what is going on. Where is his sense of compassion at the lowest level, right? This is not a terribly high bar. And then we continue. One day, he remarked without lifting his head, "In the interior, you will no doubt meet Mr. Kurtz." On my asking who Mr. Kurtz was, he said he was a first-class agent. And seeing my disappointment at this information, he added slowly, laying down his pen, "He is a very remarkable person." Further questions elicited from him that Mr. Kurtz was at present in charge of a trading post, a very important one, in the true ivory country, at the very bottom of there, sends in as much ivory as all the others put together. Okay, so here we hear the name Kurtz for the first time, and Kurtz is, you can already kind of put together, is of singular importance. In fact, we are now, from this point forward, really going to be looking forward to meeting this Kurtz person. So there's going to be a little bit of delay here, to put it mildly. All right, but Kurtz is a remarkable man. And even the chief accountant, who really only cares about numbers and figures, looks at him in the face and is like, this guy's the real deal. You will no doubt meet him there. He brings in more than everybody else combined. So before we even meet this person, we're going to start having an image built up. Now, I want you to think about that as we make our weary pilgrimage through this confounding novel, that what is the image of Kurtz? What is coming up in your mind as you see this guy? Now, it's going to be in fits and starts, right? We're going to get a description later on when we finally meet him, but his reputation clearly precedes him. Okay. And we see amongst this company, there's a kind of jockeying for status and position. Right? That Kurtz has power because Kurtz produces. But it's not just that Kurtz produces. It's also that Kurtz has a certain quality about him that either inspires worship or jealousy. And so if you're on the inner ring of Kurtz, then, you want to be there. But if you're not, you're kind of jealous of him. And we're going to also see here the emergence of a kind of conspiracy against the Kurtz. No doubt, Grin, he has one of those fancy pith hats of the safari type. This is what the chief agent says about him on the very bottom of page 22. He says, "When you see Mr. Kurtz," he went on, "tell him from me that everything here," he glanced at the desk, "is very satisfactory. I don't like to write to him with those messengers of ours. You never know who may get a hold of your letter. At that central station," so you have this outer station where the accounting is done and the shipping of the stuff out up into Europe, but then there's a central station, a kind of place where all of the stuff, the ivory in this case, is processed. And so there's an outer station and an inner station. Okay. He stared at me for a moment with his mild, bulging eyes. "Oh, he will go far, very far," he began again. "He will be a somebody in the administration before long. They above, the council and Europe, mean him to be." Right. And so you can recognize that Kurtz is someone to be feared, someone to be envied, all of these kinds of things. And so now Marlowe will go on a 200-mile walk, trek up to the central station so that he can find his steamer. All right, so I wish I had a visual here. I could draw it out for you. I'm sorry that I don't. I should have put a map on the board. But the problem with the Congo River is that from the coast to about 200 miles in, it's extremely rocky. Right, so it's not really a navigable river in quite the same way. Right, so you have this problem. You've got all this stuff in the center part that you want to get out, and you can steam it all the way down to almost the very end. But the last 200 miles or so of river are rocky, and there's falls and there's all kinds of things. So what they're in the process of doing is that they are building a railroad so that they can sort of speed run this stuff from the interior and extract it out and get it to Europe into the marketplace. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. So he's got to walk 200 miles to the central station, and it is there that he will claim his steamer. Now, what does he find out when he finally gets to the central station? Well, as chance would have it, his steamboat, is on the bottom of the river. Right? Somebody busted it up on accident. is kind of the idea. We find out, of course, that there's not really an accident. So let's go to page 25, because I have marked it here. So he gets to the central station, and he sees some more of these flabby devils. And I want you to underline anytime you see devil or flabby, there's this notion of a kind of mediocrity that is a kind of demonic mediocrity. Okay. As soon as I told him, this is the very bottom of page 24 and on to page 25. As soon as I told him who I was, he told me that my steamer was at the bottom of the river. I was thunderstruck. What? How? Why? Oh, it was all right. The manager himself was there, all quite correct. Everybody had behaved splendidly. You must, he said in agitation, go and see the general manager at once. He is waiting. So now we find the general manager. Right? So we saw the accountant before, and now the general manager. And the general manager is kind of like the guy. He's kind of the bottleneck. He's the one who's technically in charge. Okay. So after a 200-mile trek, he shows up. Right. Middle of the page. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down after my 20-mile walk that morning. He was commonplace in complexion, in feature, in manner, and in voice. He was of middle size and of ordinary build. His eyes, of the usual blue, were perhaps remarkably cold, and he certainly could make his glance fall on one as trenchant and heavy as an axe. But even at these times, the rest of his person seemed to disclaim the intention. Otherwise, there was only an indefinable, faint expression of his lips, something stealthy, a smile, not a smile. I remember it, but I can't explain it. It was unconscious, this smile was, though just after he had said something, it got intensified for an instant. It came at the end of his speeches like a seal applied on the words to make the meaning of the commonest phrase appear absolutely inscrutable, unknowable, like you can't tell what's going on. He was a common trader. In other words, he was not of noble birth. He was just a common guy. From his youth up employed in these parts, nothing more. He was obeyed, yet he inspired neither love nor fear, nor even respect. He inspired uneasiness. I love that. This idea that the power of this manager is in that his ability to inspire uneasiness in you. Right? That was it, uneasiness. Not a definite mistrust, just uneasiness. Nothing more. You have no idea how effective such a faculty can be. He had no genius for organizing, for initiative, or for order even. That was evident in such things as the deplorable state of the station. He had no learning and no intelligence. His position had come to him. Why? Perhaps because he was never ill. He had served 3 terms of 3 years out there. Because triumphant health in the general rout of constitution is a kind of power in itself. So he has ascended to his position because he can stay alive. And as we'll see, no small feat in the heart of the Congo Basin for these Europeans in particular. They are not well suited for this environment, for the malaria, for all of the things that they can catch out there. When he was at home on leave, he rioted on a large scale, pompously, jack ashore, with the difference in externals only. This one could gather from his casual talk. He originated nothing. He could keep the routine going. That's all. But he was great. He was great by this little thing that it was impossible to tell what could control such a man. He never gave that secret away. Perhaps there was nothing within him. Such a suspicion made one pause, for out there were no external checks. Once, when various tropical diseases had laid low almost every agent in the station, he was heard to say, men who come out here should have no entrance. Because out there are no external checks. And so I want us to think about this idea of an external check that in a society, in a civilization, part of what keeps us in check and Marlowe will really hit this point home later on, and I'll make sure to read this passage. But when you're in a society, there are all of these sort of rules that we follow pro forma. Even if we're not particularly jazzed about the rules, we kind of do what we're supposed to do, and those things are kept in check because of the power of social pressures, etc. But out here, there are none of those things. There's no police officer that you can phone up and say, "Hey, 911, come on down." No, there's nothing like that. Out here, the guards don't have any guards, to use that, who will guard the guards type of thing. So out here, so the manager's power comes from cloaking what he really wants and the ability to inspire unease in other people and his ability not to ever get sick, right? So this is the world that Marlowe finds himself in. This is a world that is completely chaotic, that all of the sort of the norms of civilization, let's say, are completely gone. There's nothing out here, right? And of course, notice the way in which he treats Marlowe. He says here, sorry, I lost my spot. Give me a second. This is the next paragraph. He began to speak as soon as he saw me. I had been very long on the road. He could not wait. He had to start without me. The upriver stations had to be relieved. There had been so many delays already that he didn't know who was dead and who was alive and how they got on and so on and so on. He paid no attention to my explanations, and playing with a stick of sealing wax repeated several times that the situation was very grave, very grave. There were rumors that a very important station was in jeopardy, and its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. Hoped it was not true. Mr. Kurtz was. I felt weary and irritable. Hang Kurtz, I thought. I interrupted him by saying I had heard of Mr. Kurtz on the coast. Ah, so they talk of him down there, he murmured to himself. And so he finds out, of course, that his ship is sunk. And Marlowe's like, I don't know, it should take me about 3 months. And he's like, okay, right, 3 months. And so now we're on this this scheduled delay. And later on, he'll be waiting for the rivets. Where are the rivets? Where are the rivets? So he's just now there. Marlowe is there. He's stuck in the station. And there's not really much that he can do. He just kind of has to wait around. And this is where I wanted to point out this. When Marlowe is not doing anything, this is when he treats us to these kind of meditations on life, right? And these meditations, and this is all part of the feeling, right, that he's trying to convey to us. He says, I ask myself sometimes what it all meant. They wandered here and there with their absurd long staves in their hands like a lot of faithless pilgrims, bewitched inside a rotten fence. The word ivory rang in the air, was whispered, was sighed. You would think they were praying to it. Now, mark that. You would think they were praying to the ivory. So the ivory is a kind of idol of some sort. A taint of imbecile rapacity blew through it all like a whiff from some corpse. By Jove, I've never seen anything so unreal in my life. And outside, the silent wilderness surrounding this cleared speck on the earth struck me as something great and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently for the passing away of this fantastic invasion. And then we see this spontaneous, something burst into flames. And the guys who are going there trying to put the fire out, he notices, of course, this central image of the guy going to get water in a pail to put out the fire, and there's a hole in the bottom of his bucket, right? A sort of perfect kind of image of the absurdity of the whole affair. It's really rich, and it's really important. He notices the hole in the bottom of the pail. Now, he then gets involved into this rather lengthy conversation with this guy called the Brickmaker. And of course, if you're paying attention, Marlowe makes a sort of wry comment that they call him the Brickmaker, but there are no bricks being made, right? And so it turns out that this guy is kind of the manager's spy. He's kind of one of these guys that does the bidding of the manager. And he is basically pumping Marlowe, who has no idea what's going on, by the way. He's like along for the ride guy. That's what he is. He has no clue what he has stepped into. But what he has stepped into, of course, is a microcosm for hell, right? But a hell in which people are jockeying for position. So this guy, the manager's spy, invites him into his room. Says that. This is on the bottom of page 29. He says, I had no idea why he wanted to be so sociable with me. This is Marlowe speaking. But as we chatted in there, the paragraph begins, I had no idea. I had no idea why he wanted to be so sociable. But as we chatted in there, it suddenly occurred to me the fellow was trying to get at something. In fact, pumping me. He alluded constantly to Europe, to the people I was supposed to know there, putting leading questions as to my acquaintances in this local city, and so on. His little eyes glittered like mica discs with curiosity, though he tried to keep up a bit of superciliousness. At first I was astonished, but very soon I became also awfully curious to see what he would find out from me. I want to know what he wants to find out from me. Okay. At first, I couldn't possibly imagine what I had in me to make it worth his while. It was very pretty to see how he baffled himself, for in truth my body was full of chills, and my head had nothing in it but that wretched steamboat business. It was evident he took me for a perfectly shameless prevaricator. And so why does he take Marlowe for a perfectly shameless prevaricator? Is because everybody else is a perfectly shameless prevaricator. At last he got angry, and to conceal a movement of fierce annoyance, he yawned. I rose. Then I noticed, this is, again, look at these little details. Pro tip, right? Whenever you see a work of art depicted in a story, mark it, put a circle around it, because you might not know what it means right away, but clearly the author, the poet, is giving you something he wants you to pay attention to. At last he got angry. Then I noticed a small sketch in oils on a panel representing a woman draped and blindfolded, carrying a lighted torch. The background was somber, almost black. The movement of the woman was stately, and the effect of the torchlight on the face was sinister. So look at that image. A woman draped and blindfolded, carrying a lighted torch. What is that an image for? What is that? Again, no answers right away, but you can start to see. So this figure is blind, but is holding up a torch, right? So there's an incongruity there. There's a seeming contradiction. Why would you be holding up a torch if you yourself cannot see by the light of that torch? And we've already talked about the light of civilization earlier, the sword and the light, and the light bearer. So just pay attention to this. Right? Yes, the background was somber. It arrested me. So the image arrests him. I love that image, right? It locks him up, right? It grabs his attention, we might say. And he stood by, civilly holding an empty half-pint champagne bottle, medical comforts, with the candle stuck in it. To my question, he said, Mr. Kurtz had painted this. Okay, so now this guy that we've been heard a kind of whispering campaign about, everybody's kind of jealous of him, is kind of wants to be his friend. All of a sudden we find that this guy that people have been talking about has painted this picture. It's wild. Talented, but wild. Mr. Kurtz had painted this in this very station more than a year ago while waiting for a means to go to his trading post. Tell me, pray, said I, who is this Mr. Kurtz? So now we're going to get the rumors about Kurtz, right? And when a character, it comes to us first as a rumor, comes to us first through reputation, that is the work of a storyteller, almost sort of doing a slow roll for this reveal. One of the things I always tell my students is that pay close attention to a character's entrance. You have one chance to make that first impression. But if you can play with rumor, if you can play with reputation, then you can kind of prep your audience for what you want them to see. So this is part of the reputation of the rumor. And this is what we get from this brick maker who doesn't make bricks. The chief of the interstation, Mr. Kurtz. he answered in a short tone, looking away. Much obliged, I said, laughing. And you are the brickmaker of the Central Station. Everyone knows that. He was silent for a while. He is a prodigy, he said at last. He is an emissary of pity and science and progress and devil knows what else. Pity, science, and progress. Now, you probably should circle those in your book or mark it, however you want to mark it. Pity, science, and progress. These are the great hallmarks, the great promises of the Enlightenment. So Kurtz is a prodigy who is an emissary. Like, what does it mean to be an emissary? Now, a lot of people in my circles know that I like to talk about Ian McGilchrist and the master and his emissary. So the emissary is the figure that works on behalf. So Kurtz is the figure that works on behalf of pity, science, and progress. These are the great virtues, promulgated virtues of the age of enlightenment. We want, he began to declaim suddenly, for the guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, so to speak, higher intelligence, wide sympathies, a singleness of purpose. Who says that? I asked. Lots of them, he replied. Some even write that. And so he comes here, a special being, as you ought to know. Why ought I to know? I interrupted, really surprised. He paid no attention. See, he thinks that Marlowe's playing a game. He's just going to keep going. Yes, today he is chief of the best station. Next year he will be assistant manager. 2 years more but I dare say you know what he will be in 2 years' time. You are of the new gang, the gang of virtue. The same people who sent him specially also recommended you. Oh, don't say no. I have my own eyes to trust. Light dawned upon me. My dear aunt's influential acquaintances were producing an unexpected effect upon that young man. I nearly burst into laugh. Do you read the company's confidential correspondence? I asked. He hadn't a word to say. It was great fun. When Mr. Kurtz, I continued severely, is general manager, you won't have that opportunity. So this gang of virtue. So what we're finding out is that Marlowe's aunt has some high connections, and it looks as if the corporation is using a kind of front cover story, if you will, to do the kind of work that they want to do. So while they are busy taking, extracting, raping all of this stuff from the continent, they are going to, what they're really doing is bringing, pity, science, and progress. And we're going to enlighten this unenlightened continent. So you can see the kind of cultural chauvinism that is being cloaked through this do-gooderism at the highest level. And yet, how can we square the do-gooderism of the pity, science, and progress with the absolute deplorable state of the stations, both outer and inner, and the whole enterprise? And again, the whole enterprise is similarly also totally corrupt to its core, right? And so you've got the cover story and you've got the reality. And so Marlowe in this sense, is kind of innocent. He's just in it for the ride. Yet they all kind of think that he's sort of in on the games. And so he's this inside-outside character. He can kind of see what's going on. They sort of think he's doing this thing, but he's not really doing this thing. So it's a really potent position for him to be in. It gives him an ability to see. Okay. And this is one of my favorite lines. There's so many good lines in this, by the way. This is the bottom paragraph on page 31. I let him run on, this paper mache Mephistopheles, and it seemed to me that if I tried, I could poke my forefinger through him and find nothing inside but a little loose dirt, maybe. Paper mache Mephistopheles. What a brilliant, there's no soul, there's no chest, there's no heart inside of him. He's all appetite. A little dirt, maybe. That's it. Then he looks behind him and he sees the immensity of the jungle behind him, the immensity of this slow, silent river. And he asks, what's in there? What is in there? Right? And it's this question, right? you can already kind of sense this is a loaded question. What's in there? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines from the top on page 32. He has that question right in the middle of that line. What is in there? I could see a little ivory coming out from there. I had heard Mr. Kurtz was in there. I had heard enough about it too, God knows. Yet somehow it didn't bring any image with it. No more than if I had been told an angel or a fiend was in there. I believed it in the same way one of you might believe there are inhabitants in the planet Mars. I knew once a Scotch sailmaker who was certain, dead sure, that there were people in Mars. If you asked him for some idea how they looked and behaved, he would get shy and mutter something about walking on all fours. If you as much as smiled, he would, though a man of 60, offer to fight you. So he's basically, I'm kind of becoming like that. I would not have gone so far as to fight for Kurtz, but I went for him near enough to lie. All right, so notice the way that this is sort of Marlowe jumping out of the sequence of the story. He jumps out of a little bit, he jumps ahead, and he says this: I would not have gone so far as to fight for Kurtz, but I went for him near enough to lie. So I lied for Kurtz. So now we have no idea what that is at this point. I just want to point it out. It's part of this power. Remember we talked earlier about this aesthetic emotion, that you can line things up in an asequential sort of way for maximum punch. And so what he's doing is he's setting us up. So now we know, if you're paying attention at home, and you should be, right, that we can anticipate a lie. Marlowe will lie for Kurtz. You know, and watch what he says here. You know, I hate, detest, and cannot bear a lie, not because I'm straighter than the rest of us, but simply because it appalls me. There is a taint of death, a flavor of mortality in lies, which is exactly what I hate and detest in the world, what I want to forget. It makes me miserable and sick, like biting something rotten would do. Temperament, I suppose. Well, I went near enough to it by letting the young fool there believe anything he liked to imagine as to my influence in Europe. I became, in an instant, as much of a pretense as the rest of these bewitched pilgrims. And so he recognizes that in this moment, as he's starting to play a part, he's just as detestable as any of these other pilgrims. Bewitched pilgrims. I love that phrase, as you might imagine. This simply because I had a notion it somehow would be of help to that Kurtz, whom at the time I did not see. You understand, he was just a word for me, totally abstract, a word for me. I did not see the man in the name any more than you do. We have to admit, we have no vision of Kurtz other than people are whispering about him. Do you see him? Do you see the story? Do you see anything? It seems to me I'm trying to tell you a dream, making a vain attempt, because no relation of a dream can convey the dream sensation, that commingling of absurdity, surprise, and bewilderment in a tremor of struggling revolt, that notion of being captured by the incredible, which is of the very essence of dreams. He was silent for a while. Now notice, it can be a little confusing here, but when Marlowe is speaking, he's speaking in quotation marks. But this next line is not in quotation marks, which means it's a signal to us that this is the narrator sitting on board the Nelly, and he is telling us Marlowe was silent for a while. No, it is impossible, Marlowe then goes on. Notice the quotation marks. No, it is impossible. It is impossible to convey the life sensation of any given epoch of one's existence, that which makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and penetrating essence. It is impossible. We live as we dream alone. Okay, so Marlowe, in the midst of this story that he's telling, he breaks out of the story and he looks right at us, because we're right there on the board of the Nelly. He says, do you see him? Can you see any of this stuff? Right? Do you see anything? It seems to me I'm trying to tell you a dream. And we all know, as soon as we try to tell a dream, what does it sound like? It sounds crazy, it sounds dumb, it sounds nonsensical. And yet those of us dreaming the dream can feel it, right? And so this is the challenge of the storyteller, right? The storyteller is trying to tell a shared dream. And Marlowe is frustrated by his inability to really tell this. And then he has this gut-wrenching, we live as we dream alone. Now, Conrad is letting Marlowe say that. And there's a truth there, for sure, as any of us have experienced when we try to tell a dream. But remember, Marlowe's stories are not like other sailors' stories. His yarns are of a different character. They are about conveying a dream sensation. And so that's what he's trying to convey. And look at the power that we have as the audience, as our storyteller breaks form and he looks right at us and he tells us this thing. He paused again, our narrator tells us, looking at Marlowe. He paused again as if reflecting, then added, "Of course, in this you fellows see more than I could then. You see me, whom you know." Which is right. We trust Marlowe. And this is the narrative. This is not part of the story of Marlowe going down the River Congo. This is the narrator talking to us. It had become so pitch dark that we listeners could hardly see one another. For a long time already, he, sitting apart, had been no more to us than a voice. There was not a word from anybody. The others might have been asleep, but I was awake. I listened on the watch for the sentence, for the word that would give me the clue to the faint uneasiness inspired by this narrative that seemed to shape itself without human lips in the heavy night air of the river. Right? So look at the way that Conrad is sort of showing us how we are to be experiencing this story. It's a really powerful moment. Just a couple of more points here, and then I'm going to open it up to questions if you have it. So get your questions ready. We'll put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to do this. He has this great line about work. I'm not going to get into right now. It's, he doesn't like work. He's like the rest of us, but there's something about work that does allow us to find ourselves. That is important. But anyway, get to this last bit. He says, this is the very last paragraph of section 1, chapter 1. He says, "I had given up worrying myself about the rivets. One's capacity for that kind of folly is more limited than you would suppose. I said hang and let things slide. I had plenty of time for meditation, and now and then I would give some thought to Kurtz. I wasn't very much interested in him. No, still, I was curious to see whether this man, who had come out equipped with moral ideas of some sort, would climb to the top after all, and how he would set about his work when there." So we have here about this man of morals and the work that he is setting out to do. So notice the way in which Marlowe, who has already experienced the event, is packaging this experience for us, the audience, in ways to sort of set us up. Okay. All right. So quick takeaways. We have here, this delay of the rivets, right? The rivets, and we can read between the lines enough to know that the rivets are not there because the manager of the central station does not want the rivets to come there. And what we will see is that part of why he's delaying Marlowe getting on a fixed ship to go into the center of the inner station is because he kind of wants to see if Kurtz will just die. That's what he wants, right? It's a lot easier to just have someone die than to have to kill somebody. It's kind of the idea here. So there's this conspiracy going on, and you've got all of these people sort of waiting around to sort of make their coin, right? That's kind of the idea here. Okay, so and so last thought. Oh, so the delay, of course, but it's also there's a certain power that Marlowe, the storyteller, is extracting from us, because now he's almost teasing us. Like, no, like I want to see this guy. Like, what's going on? But this man, this moral man, and the work that he is going to set out to accomplish, a work that everybody, all of these bad guys, to put it mildly, all of these bad guys are jealous of. And remember, we haven't seen Kurtz yet, but we saw a painting that he did the last time he was out here. And the oil sketch depicts a woman blindfolded, holding a torch, the torch of enlightenment. So you might imagine a kind of Statue of Liberty figure and holding up the torch. But the figure itself is blind to whatever light she holds up. So worth that. All right. So that is our session. I was wondering, give me some questions, people. Just anything. I need a little bit of interaction here. I'm so used to having kids in my class that they raise their hands, and sometimes they ask other questions besides, "Can I go use the bathroom?" as yourself. So anything. Give you Kim. Matthew, I think so. I think that's what he's, the famous depiction, right, is with the lady of justice. She's blindfolded, right, with holding up the scales. And so there's this mashing together of two different images. It's like the Lady of Enlightenment and the Lady of Liberty, but there's something lost in the mashing up of those two. I can't quite make sense out of just yet. But I think it is significant that this is Kurtz. Like, this is a work of Kurtz himself. It's some expression of some sort of interior reality, right? The last thing I'll say, and I didn't get a chance to do this, maybe I'll do an opening riff on this next time, is that poetry is on purpose, right? And so a storyteller is telling this story on purpose. And so he's choosing to let out these certain details for a kind of an effect, because he wants us to ask these kinds of questions and to experience it in this sequence. All right. So yes, I forgot to say this at the beginning, Chris. Francis Ford Coppola and his wife, his wife wrote the screenplay for Apocalypse Now, and he, of course, directed Apocalypse Now. And it is a rendition of The Heart of Darkness, but instead of set in the Congo River, with the extraction of ivory as the central conceit, he puts it into Vietnam. And if you have not seen Apocalypse Now, I highly recommend it. But read the novel now. You're in the middle of it. Read the novel first. But I think it's a wonderful reimagining of Heart of Darkness. It's really, really kind of masterful. If you have not seen it, it is really, really fantastic. Okay, so you guys are killing me. I thought there'd be some questions in the chat, but I guess I got nothing. All right, well then I won't bore you anymore. Next Tuesday, I don't have the assignment in front of me. Give me a second while everybody's here. Great question, Karen. So Karen asks, is Kurtz aware of the harsh treatment and suffering of the natives who worked to obtain the ivory? I think yes. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but yes. And there are going to be real questions as to his methods. Real question as to his methods, because he is doing something different than the rest of the agents who are charged with extracting the ivory. And that will cut precisely to the horror of what we will see later on. Yeah, I think that makes sense, Roy. I think that makes sense. Matthew, I will wait for your question. Yeah, we could do a 6 session on the movie. I'd love to do that. That'd be fun. By the way, so our next reading is due on Tuesday the 20th, a week from today, and that will be covering page 38 to 67. It's a little bit of a longer reading, so give yourself a little bit of extra time to get that done. But honestly, you could read like 5 pages a day, and you'd be plenty of time to do that. So. See if there are any other questions in the chat. Nothing. I can't tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a bad thing. Okay. All right. Well, Matt, I guess I'm going to wait for a couple more seconds if you got that going on. All right, I don't want to kill everybody else's time. We are an hour and 10 through, so we'll call this a wrap. So I will see everybody next time. By the way, please go and subscribe to the Substack. Share it if you know of anybody who's interested in doing a class like this. I'm still obviously figuring this stuff out and how to deliver it and all that nice stuff. But I appreciate y'all coming. This is pretty cool. Got a few people still. 21. All right, that's pretty good. All right, the story's religious imagery seem to all be primitive or idolatrous, save for his image of the pilgrims. Was Conrad Catholic? Does he lump Catholics in with tribal religions? So, I don't really know all that much about Conrad's late in life beliefs. He's Polish originally, and so I would guess that he's probably Catholic. But probably an agnostic of some sort would be my guess. But I want to be careful about sort of doing an overdetermined read on the basis of a biography of an author right now. I want to hold off on that a little bit and just try to treat the story as it is. I think that's important. The Pilgrims casts are silly because Marlowe is thoroughly disgusted with them as a class of people. He's calling them pilgrims somewhat tongue-in-cheek there. He's making fun of them, right? And they sort of see themselves as pilgrims, but they're really thieves, right? So I think there's something going on here. Conrad is, I think, being unsparing in his depiction of his fellow Europeans in this for very good reason, right? He himself made this trip and was horrified by what he found there, and that was part of the impetus for writing this. But I think that the novel is actually bigger than that. It's bigger than that. Okay, all right, very good, folks. So thank you so much for showing up. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. I can't believe I'm the guy who says this now, but here we are. Fantastic. And I want to appreciate everybody for paying attention. And if you have any questions, like hit me up on Substack or Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Kale Zeldin. All those kinds of things. Hit me up, and I'll figure out how to make all this work. Monetize and all that kind of stuff. I'm just still trying to figure that stuff out. But at any rate, until next time, cheers and God bless. I'm out.